absolutely wholeheartedly believe that we are reaching a paradigm where you will not even be able to talk about Black history.
Did Donald Trump incite an insurrection?
He did not incite an insurrection by any legal standard. I disagree with a lot of the stuff he did between
So I'm not asking
the election.
about legal standard. I'm asking you, did he incite an insurrection, yes or no?
No.
How can you tell me I'm not on topic if I cannot even speak?
Okay.
Perhaps if you let me speak for the duration in which you were allotted, you would know where I'm coming from. But to say white privilege doesn't exist from a historical context, to me, is respectfully absurd.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me for this much needed conversation. I'm Ciera Foster. I'm an actress, an activist, an author of the book, The Super Marvelous World of Black Inventors, a modern children's history book that teaches Black history, reimagining Black inventors as superheroes. This is not just a book about Black history. This is a book about American and world history and the testament of the human spirit, human ingenuity. Clearly, I'm so proud to be the author of that book. Go check it out on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles now. I'm also an educator. When my industry went on strike in 2020, I became an educator. I had the opportunity to teach public speaking, ethnic studies, and history. Very, very passionate about history, obviously from the book that I wrote. I also, as an actor, I had the privilege of having a historical honor of playing the first woman of color to lead a franchise, a comic book franchise, as a superhero for my role as Livewire. And as the first Black woman and woman of color to do that across the board, I don't take that lightly. And so I am very passionate about all things humanitarian, all things human rights, and just doing the right thing. I cannot stand to see injustice. And the only thing I love more than justice is history, and then politics being a close second. I myself have been on Jubilee 5 times and Dr. Dash Show twice. And what we're going to be talking about today is Amanda Seales' one Black radical versus 20 Black conservatives. Some of you may be familiar, and that's why you're here, because you already heard me talk about it. But even more than that, I'm going to touch on why I had the reaction I had. My original reaction is on my Instagram. You can go check it out. But I'll give you a summary of what that was, but there's another reason I'm here. There's another reason why I'm finally on YouTube that is far more important than any feelings of outrage I may or may not have, any questions I may or may not have regarding Jubilee. So the first thing that I want to say is Amanda Seales on that episode did absolutely excellent. She was phenomenal. She's absolutely brilliant. And I just think that she did a terrific job. I know firsthand that being in those type of debates is not easy. I have been on an episode of Surrounded. I was on the episode of 25 or 20. I don't remember which one. I think it was like 25 Democrats or liberals, versus one conservative, that conservative being one Ben Shapiro. You may or may not remember me because there are some questionable things that happened on the editing floor, even though I was the first person courageous and bold enough to debate Ben Shapiro. For whatever reason, that is platformed, that was edited out and platformed on another channel. And so I would encourage you to go to my Instagram. You can see the clip of my debate. Again, they said action. No one else got up. I debated Ben very adamantly, shook his hand, but I was very, very intentional and very transparent with the pushback that I had on the things that he had to say. I did not agree. So I won't belabor that point. If you want to see the footage, because Jubilee chose to not include it in the actual video that you saw, You can go see it on my Instagram, Ciera Foster Official. And then you can give me your thoughts on why you think that happened. But because that happened, I had some questionable thoughts of where is this coming from? I've always been in fairly good standing with Jubilee. I would like an opportunity to actually debate Ben Shapiro and it be shown, because I don't know if it was Ben's team or if it's somebody with Jubilee. For whatever reason, apparently it was desired to not have the exchange that we had visible at that level. Nonetheless, I've never said anything about that. It happened over a year ago. I've never talked about it. I've never felt that it was relevant. Sorry, I have lots of sounds going on around, so you'll have to forgive me. I live in Los Angeles and it can get loud. But yes, I know you can hear the crickets too, but I actually rather enjoy those. Hopefully we'll get some voice cancellation on this, but if not, bear with us. We're doing real life. Anyways, nonetheless, I have never talked about the Ben Shapiro debate, my experience on Surround It, and I'm not actually going to get into that, but I just said what I said. And so for context, when that happened over a year ago, I've never talked about it, certainly at least not publicly, and very seldomly in general. But it was this debate with Amanda Seales and the Black conservatives that absolutely outraged me. And then it made me actually start questioning, well, what is the agenda, right? Because I advocated on behalf of the Black community, Black interest policy, and then that was removed, and other people who were othered were advocating those same concepts for people of color. And so putting people of color together with such detrimental narratives, for those of you that don't know, Amanda Seales, when she debated these Black conservatives, there were just a lot of things said that simply were not true. What I have decided is that it is far more beneficial and a far better use of my time as someone who loves history, as a history teacher, as an author of a history book, to not complain about Jubilee, right? That's whatever that is, or whatever it will be. Table that. We have more important things. To not complain about the episode, although I'm going to be using the pieces of the episode to go through the history here. But really, it was so apparent, right? If you want to see my original shock, my reaction as I watched it live, you can go look at my Instagram. But what's apparent to myself and what I've saw from all the reviews is that there's a fundamental lack of understanding of history. I don't feel like the people that were acting. And also I have to clear another thing up. I initially thought that some of the folks on there, majority of the folks from a clip Jubilee had put up with Amanda, when she's saying, if you're from here and you're from here and you're from Angola and you're from here and you're from here and you're an immigrant, don't tell me about the Black American experience. Well, I thought that she was literally saying that to multiple persons in the room. There was actually one person, I think it was Austin, I'm not sure, who was from Angola. Whatever gentleman was in the yellow shirt from Angola. I've actually debated him in some of the pre-election debates, or he was on the forum that was on the opposing side on the episodes I filmed. So he is very, very interesting. But he actually was saying a lot of just out of the box things, historically inaccurate things. And Amanda asked where he's from. He said he was born in Angola, but he was raised in Maine. So I just want to clear up, because I got so many phone calls about my reaction. So many phone calls about my reaction. That's another reason I'm doing this. Some from African American people who were upset, right? They didn't want to write anything on my Instagram, but they were upset because they felt like people from Africa were coming into this debate forum publicly. Let me say this. No matter if I have questions surrounding things in the past with Jubilee, even though I've actively participated on that program for years, I don't feel the need to lie. And I had limited understanding at the time, but I do want to say to the African American people, to finish that thought, that people were representing or opposing Amanda in this debate that were solely African or majority African, speaking on the African American experience. I don't want to perpetuate that. That was the one gentleman raised in Angola, to my understanding. I don't think the rest of them were of the African diaspora. And he was raised in Maine. So just putting that out there, because I don't feel the need to be misleading, because I saw that was very problematic. I know there's some deep wounds. There is some distrust there. And within the Black community, that became very clear to me. And I think that that's unfortunate. It's not something I didn't know, but there's so much going on, and there's so much going on in our community that I'm hyper aware of that. And I can do a whole other video on that as a result of the phone calls I got. But no. Okay. They were African American. And to me, that makes this more problematic, because this is my concern, and this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people feeling justified in the previous treatment of African American people, as well as the current treatment of African American people. And there's already been videos and reviews of people who are seemingly fascist or Nazi-esque supporting the ideologies, the comments, and the inaccuracies, and the just basically lack of understanding of history that was displayed, not by Amanda by a long shot, but by the people on the conservative side. And I'm not saying that to be disparaging. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of disclaimers. I'm about to really get into this right now. But that's just what it is. There's a fundamental lack of understanding. And the reason there's a lack of understanding is, and it's dangerous, is because it's by design and it wasn't taught. It wasn't taught to any of us. A lot of us who do know the real history have had parents, have been African American, who had parents who knew the history and passed it down to us, or someone pointed us in the direction, or we took specialized classes or got specialized degrees, or like my African studies teacher, who was a Polish white woman who discovered all these things on her own that Black people had done, invented, and experienced, and said, this is such a profound, prolific, dynamic experience. I'm going to write a book, become a professor, dedicate my life to teaching this so other people understand this group of people that no one's teaching about. And so fundamentally, I mean, I even have a eighth grade United States history and geography growth and conflict book. This is starting back in England, and it goes all the way from the American Revolution through slavery, all Jim Crow, everything, right? And I know firsthand that the history is not being taught. And so for me, in the time that we are living in, where history is actually actively being destroyed and removed, we just can't have that happen. And this is the reality. This is the reality of that. And the only way to combat that is not getting upset and talking about how smart we are and what degrees we have. It's just sharing the history so that we all have so that it's out there. So no one can say they didn't know it. Now, if somebody wants to refute the history, have discourse, have a conversation, ask questions, then let's do it on a long form platform, but not when we're just asserting these falsehoods. And Amanda has to defend so many things that are so nuanced that have been going on and have been implemented for over 400 years. So we're going to get into a little bit of that today, just for some context. So we can't say we didn't know, because there is a fundamental lack of understanding. The last thing that I want to talk about is another reason why this was so important to me. I hope we have really embellished the lack of understanding of history component just in a general sense, but especially realized in this debate. And I have an office, but I'm purposely like in the living room because I want us to get comfortable and really enjoy it. And I'm going to get into it. I'll put a timestamp and you can fast forward all of this introduction and just get into like the review. Something very crucial. What we're seeing right now in present time with the policies being enacted, the way that the Smithsonian is being just completely dismantled in terms of anything having to do with Black history. We can't say the word Harriet Tubman saying when they talk too much about slavery. This is coming from a country that is already so ignorant as to its own history. Already people don't know the Constitution. They don't even know their rights. They don't even know how a bill is passed. Okay? They don't know when the Voting Rights Act was passed. Most people don't know this. And I'm not saying that to fault anyone. So to say that there's too much history, we are going in a direction, in my opinion, that is to make America great for a certain demographic of people. Let me be clear. I'm more moderate than anything, okay? I want this information to be out there because it's Black, but it's also American and world history. And we can't dispute what happened. And my concern is that the way things are going with the policies that are being enacted, just as they don't want certain language in the Smithsonian, which validates and preserves historical legacies, I do believe that time is of the essence to share this history because, one, I know as an educator, it's not happening. This is very annoying. Welcome to Los Angeles. I know, one, as an educator, it's not happening. Two, I do believe that we are entering into a time, and the foundations have already been set and initiated, where you will not be able to talk about actual factual Black history. Now we're seeing that you can just have subjective facts. You can assert just the most random assertions and use that as a way to debunk things that actually happen because you were never taught them. And generally, we are not taught. This is not emphasized because unlike Germany, who said, hey, this is who we were and this is who we want to be, America is still being in certain facets who they always were. So that doesn't mean things haven't changed. It doesn't mean there's not great opportunity here. But two things can be true at once, which is something categorically and fundamentally Amanda tried to emphasize for the life of her and was not able to get through. But I absolutely, to close this tangent and get into this, what we're going to be talking about today, I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that we are reaching a paradigm point very soon where you will not even be able to talk about Black history and other history, but particularly Black history. And I think the progress has been appalling. I think that there's also certain things that have happened that have been extreme in a liberal fashion that have all contributed to where we're at now. But that does not by any means justify the grotesque and disturbing and troubling actions that we're seeing in attack on American and Black history. So let's get into it. All right, so up first, we're going to talk about systemic racism. Systemic racism is not a theory, all right? So to summary of today's, episode or lesson, today's lesson will be regarding the Jubilee exchange about this very topic, systemic racism, and the belief that it does not exist. We're going to define it. What is the definition? Because we're saying this word and I feel like a lot of people don't know. Then we're going to talk about, you guessed it, slavery, because guess what? That's what this country was founded on. And a lot of this stuff goes back to slavery. How might you ask? We're going to get into it. Reconstruction. A lot of people don't realize something that is often overlooked because we talk about slavery, then we talk about the Civil War, is Reconstruction. Because in a time where things are supposed to be better, things actually got worse in the sense of like, yes, now people are not legally slaves. It's not legal to be slaves, but now there's other legal ways to enslave people, right? To dehumanize people and to harm people, which is a foundation. Slavery was a foundation, but which are the offshoots and the roots of everything that was missing in that debate in regards to historical context of what's happening right now. Then we're going to, right now, for those of you that are, then we're going to talk about Jim Crow. All right. We're going to talk about the segregation because this is not taught in totality. And it seems like a given. And that's why people are banging their head. But we have to come to a realization that we have to define what Jim Crow was too. That's why we're going into redlining. We're going to talk about that. They went into that debate. People don't know. They don't know the statistics. Well, I kind of heard something about it. Well, do you know or do you not know? Because it's happened then. And as a result, it's still happening. So if something that came as an offshoot of slavery and was used during Jim Crow to oppress Black people and is still happening now legally, we need to acknowledge the correlation. It's not just all systemic racism doesn't exist, work harder. You can't outwork laws. You can't outwork things. That's the whole point. We're going to talk about how just even trying to find a new job at some point after slavery, if you worked for someone white, was considered a crime and you could be arrested. This goes into over policing that we see now. It all comes from somewhere. These are not isolated incidents. These are not isolated incidents that are any recent phenomenon. These are the residual effects of things that have been happening for hundreds of years. And people hate to hear about that because they're like, oh, it happened so long ago. But what people need to realize about systemic racism and is that this country has been around. How can I say this? There has been slavery and segregation in more often than not in the total lifespan of this country. So while you say, and I think Amanda definitely touched on this, while you say it was so long ago, it's the majority of the lifespan of the country. So from that perspective, this ideology, and just by scientific historical metrics, how can that not have residual effect into policy and social and society? Even as of current, because from the grand scheme of things, when you talk about something that started in the 1600s, right? It ended 150 years ago, but it had a 400-year run. They didn't learn that overnight. They're not going to unlearn it overnight in a relatively short time span. So the present day wealth gap, schools, policing, we're going to talk about that too and how it all ties together. So let's get into it, shall we?
My next claim is systemic racism isn't a theory. It's our lived reality backed by data and history. Ultimately, systemic racism exists in our institutions on a government level, in our institutions, whether it's prisons or schools, and it is undeniable because they are actively trying to reinstate it right now.
Can you give me an example of one of those systems that you believe perpetuates that cycle of racism? Redlining? Okay. Yes. And how does that can you elaborate? How is that affecting the Black community?
Do you know what redlining is?
I know a little bit. I'm not an expert.
Some conservatives pushed back and said systemic racism isn't real. Racism is just individual meanness, and if you work hard, you'll be fine. Here's why that's wrong. I'm going to define the terms to show you how long each period lasted and to give everyday examples of what life looked like then and connected directly to what we are dealing with today. So, systemic racism, we keep saying this word, but we have to understand, and this is no slight, but this is no slight, this is just reality. A lot of people do not know what that means. And we don't need to be so elitist that we can't fill it in for them. And they don't need to be so proud that they can't ask. And that just is across the board with anything when it comes to social, political, or historical things that we don't understand. Because that is how you learn. Smart people ask questions. So, very shiny, but that's fine. So, systemic racism means racism built into systems, the laws, policies, institutions, not just individual attitudes. So this isn't just there's not people owning people anymore or just somebody being racist to other people. These are laws or laws that may not directly say Black person, but disproportionately and intentionally affect Black people. That happens. That is a reality.
Like insane, considering they're representatives of the state.
Yeah.
So no, I totally can get where you're coming from, but I don't think that's a institutionalized problem where it's a law per se. I think it's more so a personal vendetta in a way.
What's the difference if you are a lawmaker and you're exacting your personal ability, your personal choice through impediment of law change?
People fought a whole war to end slavery because they did not want to stop it. They did not want to acknowledge Black people as human. Those people did not just go away after the Civil War.
Lyndon B. Johnson actually proposed many systems in place
but
he actually
after that, people still got lynched.
Well, I can't really say that's a systemic problem. That's definitely a personal heart problem. Those are more people's individual choices against someone else. But when it came down to,
if the system that's in place does not incarcerate those people or create any repercussions for those actions, then it is systemic. Because when you don't allow for there to be repercussions for harmful behaviors of a people, you're literally saying our system is okay with this. So that's what Black Lives Matter is about, right? Saying like, okay.
People fought a whole war to end slavery because they did not want to stop it. They did not want to acknowledge Black people as human. Those people did not just go away after the Civil War.
This personal point of view that you're talking about, and that's what makes it also systemic, along with the fact that we know for a fact that the number of Black people incarcerated is greater per capita than white people. We know that Black people are having longer sentences for the same crimes than white people. This is not me making that up. Like, that is actual data.
Right,
so
pause.
Systemic is real.
Pause. You've been voted out.
They have been pushing back ever since. This is not one country defeats each other. This was a civil war. They were still here after. They were still in charge of certain things. These ideologies that are not so long ago. And I emphasize that because, again, these people, these ideologies, they influence policy, which is the infrastructure for systems, and vice versa. If changing one person's feeling doesn't change the outcome, but changing a rule does, then that's systemic. So let's start with, they have been pushing back ever since. This is not one country defeats each other. This was a civil war. They were still here after. They were still in charge of certain things. These ideologies that are not so long ago. And I emphasize that because, again, these people, these ideologies, they influence policy, which is the infrastructure for systems, and vice versa. If changing one person's feeling doesn't change the outcome, but changing a rule does, then that's systemic. So let's start with slavery, which lasted from 16. Let's just really think about these dates. 1619 to 1865. So often we talk about the beginning of this country, or we'll talk about literature, we'll talk about 1619. And then in a separate conversation, we'll talk about the ending of slavery, and we'll talk about 1865. But what we don't emphasize enough, and we'll even talk about, well, slavery's been over 150 years. It's not that long ago. What? It's not that long ago. Slavery in and of itself legally lasted, and that's a technicality if you want to talk about the criminal justice system now. So you can still be enslaved in our Constitution as long as you are found guilty of a crime. Hence, forced labor in prison, privatized prisons. Anyways, slavery went from 1619 to 1865. That's 246 years. As Amanda Seales said, there has been a longer period of time that we have had slavery than we have not. And I think people really need to understand that instead of putting so much emphasis on how long ago it was, because even that in context is not that long ago. Our country has been alive longer than it has been without slavery. I mean, slavery has been alive during the lifespan of our country longer than we have not been. Almost by double, if you think about that. 246 years, and we've been about 150 years without it. Like, you think those ideologies, just generationally, clearly that those ideologies still exist. And they exist through people who create systems. Perpetuate propaganda, vote into systems, create systems. All right. So 1619, 1865, that's 246 years of slavery. Chattel slavery. What is chattel slavery? We hear people say chattel slavery. We heard Amanda say chattel slavery. But what is it? Chattel slavery is literally Black people literally being owned as property. Slavery, people have almost gotten desensitized to it's a word people don't really want to say. And it's almost like, oh, let's just get through it. But when you say chattel, you're emphasizing that these people were not just all of the horrific things we know about slavery, but they were quite literally seen as property. Could you imagine? Property. Not just like, oh, you have my name. Like, I can do anything I want to you. Anything. And we don't like to talk about that. See, we really need to teach, and this is what they never want you to know, because even with the limited watered down history, they said, oh, we already gave you too much. Because if the real history, go watch Roots. If you knew the real history, it's disgusting. It's inhuman. Making oil out of Black people's skin. Castrating Black men upside down to make an example of them. Breeding farms. Doing the most horrific, gruesome, grotesque things. Daily, repetitive rape. Day after day. To even young girls and boys. Cutting off ears and teeth. Burning their skin. Anything terrible you can do to a person. The world rioted as they should have for George Floyd. And that's in 2025. And he's not even considered anyone's property. So could you imagine if no one's rioting for you? If it's legal? And in fact, if somebody comes to try to stop what's happening to you, they could legally be killed. But y'all think this mindset and ideology is supposed to just wash away in a couple generations. When this level of evil that you're not taught about existed. No, they don't want you to know. They don't want you to have the technology and the AI to know. But guess what? So they're going to start watering it down. But then, because you don't know, they can put whatever they want. They're going to manipulate what's out there on the internet, and you'll never know. But God is good. So let's keep going. This is real life. This is really happening. Like Lord knows, I have gotten the request to do a channel for some time. I don't mean to make this about me, but it was this that did it. After years. Because it's a necessity. This is real life. They don't want you to know the past. And one of my favorite philosophers said, favorite quotes by a philosopher, Edmund Burke, a history unknown is a history bound to be repeated. Recited again by Winston Churchill. Whether you don't like them or not, those words ring true. And they do not want you to know. Everyday life, for example, you had no legal right to family if you were property. Your spouse or child could be sold away tomorrow. No right to wages. Think about, well, you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. That's your life. Oh yeah, they didn't have to feed you. You know, you think it's stressful if you get low on cash now. What if you were working endlessly? You think you go, oh, I'm working so much I can't get ahead. Could you imagine? No legal right to family. Your spouse or child could be sold away tomorrow. No right to wages, violence, whipping, rape was legal and it was common. Think about what a disgusting, perverted society, evil, demonic a society this has to be, where this is all known to be going on and it's just the norm. The only way you can get away with that is if you make the people that you are doing that to even more inhumane, seemingly, than you are in reality. To dehumanize them completely. To make them to be savages. To make them to be violent. A gentleman wanted to talk about the music and the culture, and Amanda pointed out who was behind this messaging, because we are a brilliant array of artistry as Black people. Always have been and always will be. Always. And yet and still, the music that gets put out there, even though that was not the origins of hip hop, but yet and still the music that gets put out there, that gets endorsed, it gets the money, that gets the deals, it gets the spins, it gets the things, all the attention, is the most damaging. Not because we don't have other messaging, but because the system for that field of music and entertainment has some folks who have taken their personal ideology and implemented it into the system. Let's keep going. Why does this matter? The country's economy and laws normalize treating Black life as disposable and unprotected. This is normalized. Let me tell you something. Human nature, psychology, which I also have a degree in, you get used to anything, just like being institutionalized. You just start getting the human mind to survive. The human mind to survive will adjust. The country's economy and laws normalize treating Black life as disposable and unprotected. A mindset that doesn't vanish the day a law changes. Just by mere statistics and psychology and common sense, it is much less likely that you are going to change, advocate, especially if your life is in danger, a law that benefits you. In fact, you would be more inclined to have bias towards the indoctrination of whatever is being propagated to you to uphold the validity and justification for such inhumane acts, policy, and ideology that you benefit from. I can't go there. It's going to be too long. Okay. So that's slavery, right? That's almost 300 years right there. 246 years, right? Of active legal slavery. Okay, we're not even getting into anything else as of yet. And even in the Constitution, which was, I believe, 1787, when they had the 3/5 compromise, they were not even, Black people were not even seen as human. So that's what this country was based on, the belief. That means that no matter what happens, anything for humans was never meant for you. And there's people who still believe that. And to some extent, if you look historically, it's on both sides of the aisle. Let's keep going. All right. So that's slavery. That's 300 years. It's interesting to me. We're not on reparations yet, but, you know, so many things. This stupid fly in here. It drives me crazy. I do apologize. It's the summer in Los Angeles. So many crazy things have happened in this country for such a shorter and in the world time period. We talk about Japanese folks that were in the internment camps for some time. We talk about how the Holocaust survivors, they receive reparations. But for something that happened the longest length of time is the one, and it was the most brutal in terms of length and savagery. Just not comparing to the Holocaust, but the length in and of itself was 300 years. I'm not saying, tell me why, it should be obvious, Black people deserve reparations. But how do you justify those other folks, which folks will bend over backwards and say that they should have received reparations, which they did, for things, atrocity that occurred more recent, which is the shameful part, because it has been this long and for a short length of time.
Their culture, Black culture is toxic. The Black culture is toxic. We have produced a culture that is toxic. And let's get on the fact that there's no fathers in the Black home. Let's talk about that.
Stop.
Let's talk about that.
None of this is gonna work if y'all are just gonna sit here and make up shit.
It's
not gonna work. No, a debate has to be in facts.
You're putting off emotional liberalism right now.
I am not putting off emotional liberalism. You're putting off unfounded lies based in conservatism.
Misinformation. Remember they did the misinformation thing all summer where everything conservatives did. They said misinformation.
You're carrying a chain around your neck of an apartheid nation that actively wants to harm Black people and non-Jewish people. But let me bring it back.
Let me bring it back. Selling Black people in Africa.
That was not happening in the context that you're saying.
And they were selling their own people. Black people still sell their own people today too, by the way.
I don't know if I'm going to last.
We're selling our own people today too.
I don't know if I'm going to last.
You probably won't last with me.
I won't, because your ignorance is so overwhelming.
That's liberals. Y'all start name calling when y'all getting defeated in an argument.
You won't have an argument because you keep cutting me off.
Oh, well, that's fine if they don't let me come back. I made my point.
You didn't make your point.
I made my point.
You haven't made your point. And let me just tell you about your point. You started off saying, we believe in hard work.
Yeah.
And we believe in being compensated.
Reparations is not, though. Reparations is not hard work. It's stealing. It's Robin Hood.
That not even including what we're going into now, all the other facets which make up systemic racism, going into Reconstruction now, because I'll be talking all night. And I don't want this to be super, super, super long. I'm trying to be cognizant. There's no way you can go through all of this, but I just want to give some landscape, because don't nobody know history anymore. And that's all right. We're going to try to get it together. I encourage educators, anyone who has the ability to speak up, teach this. Do your research. Make sure you know what you're talking about, but teach it while we still can. All right. Backlash on paper. Southern states passed the Black codes. All right. So this is that not even including what we're going into now, all the other facets which make up systemic racism, going into Reconstruction now, because I'll be talking all night. And I don't want this to be super, super, super long. I'm trying to be cognizant. There's no way you can go through all of this, but I just want to give some landscape, because don't nobody know history anymore. And that's all right. We're going to try to get it together. I encourage educators, anyone who has the ability to speak up, teach this. Do your research. Make sure you know what you're talking about, but teach it while we still can. All right. Backlash on paper. Southern states passed the Black codes. All right. So this is Reconstruction. Hold on. Let's backtrack. Reconstruction was from 1865 to 1877. So now we added slavery, and that was 246 years. Now we're in pretty much a 12-year period. What was this? A brief window after the Civil War when Black people, I got to do it. Another thing you guys are not, I'm not gonna get all the way off track, but another thing that is not often talked about and is very misleading in these textbooks, right, is the fact that if you ask anybody, even any grown person, let alone any child, about the Civil War, about Abraham Lincoln, they'll say Abraham Lincoln wanted to end slavery. He wanted to free the slaves. Abraham Lincoln wanted to preserve the Union. Abraham Lincoln was getting that thing handed to him, and he was about to lose this war. Okay? Civil War is never popular. So you are done. War, let alone a civil war. It's the last thing anybody wants, right? So, some of y'all know. So, in order to cripple the South from succeeding from the Union and to win the war, the Black soldiers were enlisted to fight to help them win. But they demanded exchange for their freedom. It was also the only plausible way to win the war, not just from a military standpoint, but also to cripple the very foundation, the ideology that upheld the economic independence in which the South would be able to sustain itself and to succeed upon. Because the North had industrialization, but, the South was crop country. So we don't have nobody to tend these crops and they fighting us. Now we've taken your slaves and we've increased our military capacity. And these men fighting for their freedom. There is nothing else. There's nothing else. Their sisters, their wives, their families. Gone. Generations, their future. Where we are here right now so I can talk to you. They were fighting for that. So Abraham Lincoln, I get passionate, as I tend to do. If you know, you know. If you see me on Jubilee, you're not surprised. And if you know me, you know. Yeah, know. And hell, you know now. So, they fighting for their freedom. This is also crippling the Southern economy. So they need to be a part of the United States. It pretty much was the only way. We also don't talk enough about that. Go watch Glory. It's a great movie. Denzel Washington is in it. Talks more about that. Let's keep going. All right. So the Reconstruction is a brief, approximately 12-year period from 1865 to 1877. Look, checking time. After the Civil War, when Black people voted. I don't talk about this enough. They voted. Now, the Voting Rights Act, it's just so crazy. The anniversary just passed. Right? August 6, 1865. Right? That's not that long ago. Let's be clear. But before that, we don't talk about this 12-year period, which is very crucial, but they don't want you to know about this, right? And it's funny, it's called Reconstruction because it was just a way it was supposed to be to mend back after the Civil War. But what it did was the backlash was so great. That is how the beginning of systemic racism really started taking off because they said, okay, we actually have to deconstruct the Constitution in terms of what it means for Black folks and implement these different systems so that, yes, we are taking now what was physical slavery and how can we make it social, political, not in terms of being property, but in terms of still your life not being valued, whether it's in education, finance, the criminal justice system, or otherwise. Because I can assure you, Black people were absolutely thriving. I really encourage y'all to go pick up my book, The Super Marvelous World of Black Inventors. It will inspire you. You got folks from all of these time periods just succeeding, being fabulous in spite of. And it's not just for Black folks. It's for anybody that needs to understand the testament of not only just the Black experience, but the human capability to be excellent in spite of. All right. So the backlash on paper was the Southern states. So to this progress that was supposed to happen of Black people having these freedoms, because again, once they were just seen as property, then after the Civil War ended, now they're free, even though slavery was so raggedy. A lot of our people didn't even know, aka Juneteenth, they was free, or the last slaves in Texas didn't know they was free until like a year later. I'm sorry, people back then was just trash. That is an expression for those of you who don't know. I'm not saying. I mean, if you were invoking slavery, that is trash behavior. All right. So, in response to the progress that was made by Black folks, who now all us are, oh no, they have human rights, and they're making progress, and they're excelling, even though we've not allowed them to read. That's a whole nother thing I can get into, is this, the Slaughterhouse Acts and how Black people were actually in places of government. Oh yeah. People who could not formally read, former slaves. Black people have always been builders. But the backlash, just like we're seeing a backlash now, had detrimental consequences during this 12 years. The backlash on paper was Southern states passed Black codes, laws that made ordinary life illegal for Black people. Laws that made ordinary life illegal for Black people. Labor contract laws, such as leaving an abusive employer, for example, could mean arrest for breaking a contract. So people have to understand, this was all legal after slavery ended, right? This was all legal. I don't know what that was. Excuse me. Feather. This was all legal after slavery ended. Okay? You can't leave your employer. They could treat you any type of way. But if you try to leave them, we come to get you, getting arrested. You try to better yourself, no, you better go work for them. They're not paying you? Tough. They're not paying you. You better go work for them or you'll get arrested. You better not complain or you'll get arrested, or worse, we might even kill you. So even though the Constitution say you're not legally property, sound like slavery to me. Again, this is 1865, 1877. Sounds like slavery to me. And many Black people were killed. So again, the language is slavery ended. So where does this come from? We see all these incidents. Where do you think the stigma comes from when it's Black people are difficult? Black people are problematic? No, because it was a problem if we advocated for ourselves, and it always has been. And that's trickled down. They have to be tamed. They have to be kept in line. They're savages. You got to stay in your place. So no one might not be saying that aspect anymore, but that's what the system is telling you. If you can't complain and you're in the workplace and you experience discrimination, arrest, aka convict leasing. Amanda talked about this, how systemic racism is so real that they started policing people at an exorbitant rate as part of these Black codes. So we might not be So we're just going to make your existence illegal. Right? Give me another. She said they started arresting people at such an exorbitant rate that they actually created an additional slave force within the criminal justice community. So that system. So that's why when we talk about, oh, there's so many black people in prison and people being overcharged, it's always been that way. It's not just black people, as these people over here say on Jubilee, very Joshua, who I've debated. Nice young man, but hell no. You're highly misinformed. You have a unique experience because of your background. This has always been the case as per the claim backed by data and history. You want to talk about criminalization? Well, we can just privatize these prisons for profit, just as JP Morgan, these other super powers, they benefited from chattel slavery. They used black slaves as collateral to build up to the super empires that they are now. Multi-billion companies. They've done the same thing with the prisons. We'll just get you in here at an exorbitant rate. We'll make money off you, and we'll make it so you could never get out. As Amanda Seales said, after slavery ended, people were getting arrested for years upon years for jaywalking. Could you imagine? They killed Emmett Till for wolf whistling at someone, allegedly, a little boy. I try to stick to the facts as people got something to say about everything. I mean, that is a fact. People say you're being emotional. No, there's just a lot of emotion to the history that you don't know and that you refuse to learn. But you're going to get this history today. All right, so let me give you another example. Labor contract laws, leaving abusive. Okay, we talked about that. Arrest, convict leasing. The state rented prisoners to plantations, railroads, and mines. You see these people there snatching up by ICE, but you don't know they have them working in detention centers, sending them to privatized prisons all around the world for profit. It's the same playbook, baby. Who's going to advocate for you? The ideology yesterday was less than 2 years, over a decade ago, within a short, basically a decade, was that you were property. Who is going to advocate for you? This is why the things that are happening today, it's the same ideology. That you don't deserve rights if you're an immigrant. But that also doesn't even compare, respectfully, to what black people were enduring. Although it's just awful. I want to read that again. Arrest, convict leasing. This is huge. The state rented prisoners during Reconstruction to plantations, railroads, mines. That's slavery by another name, made legal through the 13th Amendment. The exception clause. Slavery is abolished except as punishment for a crime. So now what do? Well, I'm going to punish you and I'm going to enslave you because I'm going to make everything you do a crime. Black people were jailed for jaywalking, as Amanda said, for years. Black people were jailed for being outside after dark for years. Black people were jailed for being in wine establishments for years, if not killed for all these things. If you could not show papers or prove to someone's liking that you had a white employer, you were jailed. It sounds ridiculous, but this is true. So America being built on slave labor, which also contributes to capitalism and making this whole thing move and work, was always built on slavery, even after slavery ended. Because you're going to prison and you're being leased out. If Black people were congregated in one space for too long and couldn't explain why, they were jailed. This is real. This is not made up. So why do you think when you see Black people portrayed in films and in real life getting hemmed up for just congregating and look suspicious? Because that's the ideology that the system has been built upon via policy, which is systemically, meaning ongoing and institutionalized racism. That's just a couple examples. Let's move on to Jim Crow. I highly, highly, highly encourage you to learn some of these things yourself. I'm just because I can only give so much, but there's so much, and Amanda did a terrific job. But we just had to give some context because the lack of history, we're not going for it. Not at that level. Step 3, Jim Crow, 1877 to 1965. Now this is about 88 years. So we 246 years from 1619. It's the start of slavery. Then 1865, slavery ends. We go from 1865 to 1877. That's Reconstruction, or the deconstruction of allowing any of the rights in the Constitution, human rights, to be given to Black people. How do we do that legally? How do we do that systemically? How do we do that systematically? How do we do that to ensure that their children's children will never be able to be equal to us or surpass us? Because that is the fear. Case in point, present day, here we are. All right, Jim Crow, 1865 to 1965, about 88 years. What was it? It was legal segregation, often called separate but equal. Ooh, this is very interesting because this is coming up now. We got some othered folks who are up in Arkansas right now, separate but equal, got their own compound. They believe in white supremacy. Enforced by law but this was enforced by law and violence. If you're keeping me separate, but you enact violence on me, how is that equal? If you have the legal right to act violence on me for any reason without repercussion, how is that equal? Oh, that debate was ignorant. Everyday examples: separate schools, separate buses, separate bathrooms. So let me stop here because I'm a teacher and Amanda brought this up. This is, again, systemic. We're going to separate the schools. And we're going to make sure that those schools don't get funding. I could do a whole video on what's happening right now before our eyes that y'all don't realize. The same playbook. They don't get funding. I'm going to make sure that neighborhood doesn't get clean water. That's separate, but that's not equal. And I'm going to shut you out of the voting in so many ways. Even if I got to gerrymander, so that you'll never get an equal representation to even be able to change these generational and statistic things. I didn't shook the mic. That's God telling me don't get off track, because Lord knows I'll go off with knowledge. Everyday examples of this separate but equal are separate schools, separate buses, separate bathrooms. So all this stuff is going to be raggedy run down. Every time we build it ourselves, it's going to be bombed. It's going to be destroyed. There's going to be lynchings. There's going to be murders. There's going to be heinous deaths. So brutal and gruesome that we want to encourage, send a message to never try to build again. The closest we'll give you is some facets of liberal democracy to cling on to one day. That's going to make somebody mad. Denial of voting through the poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation. We see Georgia going through all this stuff. All these things, people got to prove who they are to vote. All these technicalities, black voters getting denied. Not having proper representation due to gerrymandering and forced redistricting 5 and 10 years earlier, whatever it is. It's not supposed to be happening, but doing anything to stay in the power to suppress a certain demographics vote repeatedly. Why? What are they so afraid of? The same thing they've always been afraid of. Since 1865. Here we are staying in 1877 to 1965 for Jim Crow. Again, this is 88 years of period. A black person could be jailed for sitting in the wrong train car or even trying to vote. Think about that. Now I want to talk about look at all my notes. Okay. Because I don't want to get too crazy. If you want me to talk about certain things longer, let me know. But I do have to wrap this up because I don't want to be too overwhelming for people. in terms of time, I'd rather do multiple. If there's anything you want to comment on, anything you want to include, please drop it in historical piece because people don't know the history. In fact, I would love for people, if it's not accurate, then you will be held accountable. But there's things that are historical context that you want to chime in on this, please, because the history is not known. At the end of the day, I am trying to have a dialogue as much as I'm trying to give a historical insight. Housing policies 1930s to 1960s, redlining FHA plus the GI Bill. Now, mind you, there's so much nuance. I'm just laying out certain things to show the different type of systemic racism. But if we went through the school process, if we went through the criminal justice process, if we went through the healthcare system, Lord, oh my gosh, all of these things could be an hour long, if not more, discussion in and of itself that have to do with laws and policies that might not say black people, but that indirectly weave together, or that to the eye indirectly, but they actually weave together to hold up this fabric that is perpetually the foundation for, unfortunately, the black experience institutionally in America. Which I argued with Ben Shapiro about. Go check it out on my Instagram. Okay, so housing policy 1930s to 1960s. Redlining FHA GI Bill, what it was. The federal government banks redlining maps. They drew redlining maps. So the government and banks. So how you get your money. Think about everything we do goes through banks. And the government. The government that controls everything, including the country you reside in. The laws you have to follow. The laws that affect you. They decided that black neighborhoods outlined in red were labeled hazardous. Everyday example of redlining. Amanda gets into this and she does a brilliant job with it. Qualified black families apply for a mortgage. The bank says, your block is redlined. No loan. And that's it. So the government's going to decide that there's no value here. And because that now, the bank won't buy in. So now there's no equity. So you can't use that to build your credit, to build your family up, to buy another house, to buy other properties, to start a business. You can't do none of it. Because the government is saying, okay, we're going to have this one law that says this area is hazardous, right? We're going to have these policies, these statistics, right? She talks about statistics can be made all the time. These people this is hazardous. Or they might actually make it hazardous by dumping something into the area. It's happening now. No one's going to push back against it. Now, that would never happen in Beverly Hills because they're protected. So we're going to make this hazardous, or we're just going to say it's hazardous, or we're going to say these people are violent because we're actually over-policing them for all the reasons I said prior. All stemming from racism. Now it's all coming together. So now, not only are we arresting you, not only are we not giving you enough money for education, but now we're saying you can't even build up equity and get you a house. And if you have a house, we're going to make sure it completely never accrues value. You can't borrow against it. You can't galvanize and bootstrap yourself up, right? This is the system. Now people say, oh, I've made it. But again, it's like me when I was able to surpass the trap of being suppressed as a Black child in the education system as far as literacy. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I'm just the exception. So that's why a lot of Black people do not have generational wealth. They do not have equity. And their ancestors, unlike anyone else's ancestors, who, even if it was a 401k, were not paid for their wages. So they've never been able to accrue any type of wealth, there's no trust, nothing. Your property, there's no value. You're being redlined. And this was intentional. So now you're being over-policed, being redlined. You cannot get a loan. Meanwhile, white families receive government-backed mortgages in the suburbs. So we're denying you the ability to even get a house. And if you do get a house, we're going to make sure that it has no equity. But we're going to make sure that your white counterparts actually get government-backed mortgages and incentives. How is this not systemic? How is this not generational? Oh, it's not happening more. It is. There's studies, look it up. People don't want to believe that, but it's true. They just chop down and make it more and more apparent. So now there might be, instead of we're redlining you because it's in this manner, we're saying this demographic, this area just has less equity. There's less businesses. There's less schools. There's there's just so many things. I could go on this all night. I got to keep going. You need to look up redlining, and you need to watch what Amanda Still said on redlining again, and then you need to look it up, and then you need to watch it again. Hopefully I've explained it decently. I think I have. Meanwhile, white families in the government-backed mortgages in new suburbs. So this is, again, not just this, if you work really hard, you can make it. Okay, you're the exception. And again, why should someone else have to not work as hard? This is why any type of diversity, equity, inclusion was trying to combat these things. Not to give a leg up or a hand out, but to just make things even across the board. The reality that people don't want to face, because again, to those who are privileged, equality feels like oppression. That's just across the board. That's a very human thing. And it just happens to be true when it comes to racism and white privilege. All right. Now, many people, I was happy to see one gentleman, he's othered, he's white, he gets it. So it doesn't mean that you are just destined to that belief, but it just means that many people have a predisposition to be opposed to something that is equal if they are privileged. Fortunately, a lot of people are able to, at this juncture, have more human decency, but there are a lot of people, as we know, that do not, and they still uphold these ideologies. The GI Bill, on paper, education and low interest home loans for veterans. On paper, the GI Bill after World War II was education and low interest home loans for veterans. In practice, however, local banks and segregated colleges rejected many Black veterans. So we're going to force you to go over here. We're going to have you fight these people. And then when you come back, we're going to at least the GI Bill that you're supposed to get for serving and fighting for this country, where you're not even seen as equal, right? and your life has less value, where you should be able to receive education, where you should be able to get a home, where you should be able to get a loan. We're going to reject it on the basis of your race, of your blackness. So no matter what you do, if you exist, if you fight for this country, you are still systematically, you might not be a slave, devalued. And this is what Black Lives Matter is about. Not just in addition to constantly, as Amanda said, being killed by the police and nothing happened as a result. But it's all of these things. It's the constant devaluing. I can go fight for you, but I can't come get a loan. There is a fear that Black people will ever just be the brilliance that they are. And that's why the rhetoric with total lack of history is dangerous. That was in that debate. But we need to have these discussions anyway. We need to get this history because there's something far more dangerous at risk. And that is it repeating itself because we don't know. And we refuse to understand. Consequence. White families who bought homes, they build equity, they pass on wealth to their children, and Black families are locked out for decades. You have to understand when you're able to get these opportunities, not only are you building them, but you're also teaching. So we have the opposite effect. There's generations and generations of Black families never having not only the capital to pass down, but the knowledge. You can't even teach a man to fish because we're completely cutting you out. So let's put this timeline together. 246 years of slavery. 246 years. That's almost 300 years. Slavery has only been over for just roughly 150 years or so. Put that into real context. It's not that outrageous that the ideologies have not died out. They've been alive twice as long. And there was slavery almost by double the amount that there has not been slavery. Do you really understand? Do you get that? Slavery has been indoctrinated into this country for twice the time that slavery has been banned. But yet you think because laws changed in a shorter period of time, that residual effects can't possibly exist. That Black people are just lazy and don't work hard. No, we succeed in spite of, as Amanda said, and that is our magic. I'm going to get through this. But this is important. 246 years of slavery, plus 88 years of Jim Crow, over 330 years of legalized racial control. We have only had about 60 years since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. One lifetime for people to recover from centuries of blocked wealth and opportunity. Now let's connect to the present. And as I'm coming to a close, I just want to say I cannot begin. I don't have the capacity, and I even don't have the knowledge to explain systemic racism in its totality, in its nuance, in all its forms, fashion, and events. Because that historical context would literally take an eternity. Because it's over 400 years and counting. But I hope this provided someone with some perspective of something they did not get in school, and will be the beginning of them seeking, while we're still able to, more knowledge of not only this Black history, but this American and world history that you are not being taught. Get curious as to why, regardless of what your skin color is. But if you're Black, you better know. Especially if you're getting up here debating. I love a good debate. Fundamentally, in theory, especially the middle ground series, I don't have an issue with Jubilee. I'm curious about what I'm curious about. Connect to the present. Wealth today. The typical white family has much more wealth than the typical Black family. Roughly an order of magnitude. This isn't about effort, it's about decades of home ownership, because who was literally slaving more than slaves for hundreds of years? It's not about effort. And even then we did our own. Coming from nothing, they destroyed it. That's a whole other lesson in and of itself. If you don't know about American history, look up Tulsa Race Massacre. Look up all the things that Black people built that were destroyed. The schools, the hospitals, the communities, the Black Wall Street. How do you get up if somebody keeps slicing your legs down every time? And then making you live in a system, so they keep tearing apart everything you built, that oppresses you at every turn, and making even being just alive illegal. All right, wealth today. The typical white family has much more wealth than the typical Black family. Roughly an order of magnitude. That isn't about effort, it's about decades of home ownership and inheritance with white families that white families could access, while Black families were locked out. Today's schools. Many districts fund schools through local property taxes. Homes in historically redlined areas that we talked about earlier, that Amanda talked about, are worth less. Schools serving those areas collect less, and kids get fewer resources today. How are you going to do better? You don't know better. You can't know better because they're not teaching you, because there's no resources by design. And then they're over-policing you, but underserving you. Policing and incarceration today. The 13th Amendment Exception Clause helped create a punishment-based system, from convict leasing to modern mass incarceration. Black people are more likely to be stopped, charged, and punished even when behavior is similar. I know this for a fact, as I was able to teach cadet classes for the LAPD about these issues. It's the policing that they have been taught. Why have they been taught this? It goes back to the Black codes and slavery. They may not be picking cotton, but it's another way to enslave and oppress Black people. Obviously, it's still relevant today, and it's not because Black people are lazy. It's actually the contrary. So, this is just, like I said, a very small iteration of the history that we need to be discussing. And to Amanda's point, systemic racism is not a theory. It is our lived, past, and present experience, backed by history and data, all of which we cannot even go over tonight, and I encourage you to find for yourself. Let's talk about it. Come back to this platform and share it, because they're getting rid of it for a reason. If there's anything you guys all want me to talk about, let me know. So when someone on stage says that systemic racism isn't real, they erase the rules. Not the people that shaped America. Meaning, just because slavery ended, just because Black people voted, that doesn't mean every time something forward moving happened, 10 other things have not happened since and until now to try to keep Black people in the same position. Do we have more opportunities than ever? Sure. When we're comparing being considered property. Systemic racism is not a feeling, it is a paper trail, and we are living through the results of it right now. And I leave you with the story of me as a little girl. My mother being told, as so many Black folks have this common experience. And again, we're all our own lived experience, and that's part of the issue. And that's why history is so important, because you can't relate if you haven't lived it. My mother being told that I would never learn how to read, that I was incapable. Imagine what my life would have been had she accepted that. As that is the norm, that is the statistic. That is what the system says. That's one of the many roadblocks to keep me in the system. So again, just because you have a personal experience, or a one Black person made it, or we had a Black president, does not mean that that personal experiences change the history or the system that has contributed to the overall Black experience in this country. We have to understand where we come from, where this country comes from, to even potentially grasp where we are, and to imagine and take hold of the possibilities what we could be, for better or worse. I'm Ciera Foster. History matters. Go read a book. And thank you for tuning in. Until next time, drop your comments below if you enjoyed this, if you want to see more of this, if there's more things you want to learn about. Understand that it is our responsibility, those of us who know the history, to share it. And if you don't know, it is your responsibility to learn it, to get curious. A great indication of what you're missing out on is the lengths that are being taken to remove it. Get curious about what's being removed and then study it. And then come holler at me. Have a good night, you guys.